Hello and welcome to episode 66 of TBR, the To Be Read podcast, where we talk about the books we love and the topics that interest us. I'm Patrick Stemp, and as always I have Jamie Maltman and Michael Ronn here with me. How you guys doing?
Great, Patrick. How's it going?
Good. And real quick shout out before we go any further, I just wanted to mention that I think we realized a week too late that Jamie has been on the show for 1 year now. So happy anniversary. I think we missed it by a week. I'd have to count up from when he started on the show. And this week we're going to be talking about best fantasy series, and we have a guest, Justin Sloan. And how are you doing, Justin?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show. And Michael, I think, has a little bit of an introduction for Justin, so we'll let him roll with that before we move any further.
Yeah, and pardon me if I butchered the bio, Justin, but Justin Sloan is a video game writer at Telltale Games, where he has worked on such titles as Game of Thrones and The Walking Dead. His novels include such titles as Falls of Redemption and Back by Sunrise, and he dabbles in screenwriting. Justin studied writing at the Johns Hopkins MA in Writing program and screenwriting at UCLA. Before becoming an author, Justin served in the Marines and has lived in Japan, Korea, and Italy. He recently joined the Self-Publishing Answers podcast as a third co-host with Kevin Tumlinson and Nick Becker.
So, when did that happen?
So 2 episodes ago, one that's been aired so far. I don't know when this will be aired. I guess it's live on YouTube, right? So as of we're speaking now, one that's come out and one more that's about to happen, and we'll be meeting up again this Friday and probably continuing on.
Oh, okay. I listened to them, and I maybe I must have missed one. I'm going to have to refresh my feeds.
Yeah, the new one came out yesterday, I think it was, and it's
cool.
It's about writers' conferences and book signings and whatnot.
Okay. Cool.
Awesome. Well, Kevin's a good friend of the show, so that'll be an awesome addition to the podcast.
I think I ran across them through the Self-Publishing podcast. I'd interviewed on there, and then they contacted me, and then I went on Kevin's Word Singler podcast as a guest, and then we started chatting, and they're like, "Yeah, why don't you come on?" And we were kind of joking about making it like, on Cheers, they have like the special guest star who ends up being on there for like 2 or 3 years or something. So
that's
trying to go that route. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll start with our roundtable and talk about what we've been reading recently. And Justin, as our guest, do you want to go first? What have you been up to reading-wise?
Yeah, so I started reading What Dreams May Come, which is an older book, of course, and they made a movie out of it with Robin Williams. And the movie had its intricacy. It was interesting, it was weird. But the book is amazing. The book is blowing me away. And I'm reading it in part because it relates to a book that I'm working on, and it has some issues that are very much related, with a total different tone and style and all that. But it's if anybody hasn't read it, the tone, the prose, the way that he depicts the characters, I think he just did an amazing job with it. And that's Matheson. Is that how you pronounce his name? Richard Matheson? You guys probably know better than me. It's my first time ever reading a book of his. He also wrote I Am Legend, and I looked up the sample of that the other day too, just to see if it was as well written. And yeah, it's pulling me in as well. So I think I'm a new fan of his.
I've read I Am Legend, and of course it's 1,000 times better than the movie.
So. Yeah.
And
I want to leave that to next.
Yeah, with completely different story, actually. It's one of those.
Yeah. I heard people criticizing the movie when it came out for the ending especially, and I'm not sure. I look forward to seeing what the difference is. Don't spoil it.
No, I won't. It's but it's a little closer to the book than World War Z was, but yeah, there's some significant differences there.
Cool.
Is that it?
I mean, I'm reading a lot of other stuff too, but I started listening to the Martian Chronicles on audiobook last week. Yeah, and because the library had it, Overdrive, I think it is. We can listen to audiobooks on over for free. And so I started listening to that just because, that's a classic. Why haven't I listened to that? And that one's been pretty impressive as well. He has much more of that old school flowery prose that I'm not. It's not really my style. I kind of write to the simple masses, is how I like to say it. but I definitely enjoy it. Listening to audiobook on the way to work, it's very much like it gets you in the zone. You're like, wow, this guy, he can speak so eloquently. I can never do that.
That's cool. So what's the narration like, just out of curiosity? I love the Martian Chronicles. I've never heard any of Redner's audiobooks, though.
Yeah, I don't remember who the narrator is, but the narrator, he definitely has a great voice. It's very like one of those deep, like you want to listen to it, but at the same time, not so much that you fall asleep. It's he's engaging, keeps you awake. So it's
that's good.
Great job.
For driving while you're listening.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't want to crash the car.
I feel like narrators have the two extremes where they take voices and they go super high pitched, and you're like, "What are you doing? Get out of my ear!" Or you have the other side where it's kind of like, oh, "I have a deep voice and now I'm talking like this." And you're like, "Come on!" So he did a great job. I like the Harry Potter audiobook narrator did a wonderful job with that too. But you have the extremes where it's kind of like, we'll get into all this, but one of my favorite series is Game of Thrones, and I'm not going to bash anybody. I'm just that one I don't have as many compliments about, as far as the narration goes. I can't get into it as well. So,
It's one of those things that you really shouldn't notice, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
I found that with the narration for The Martian, we've talked about that one before. Like it's just you don't notice that you're being read a story. I mean, you just get into the story, right? But some others, like I tried listening to The Fold, and I still haven't gone back to that one. I listened to the first 10 minutes, and I just can't bring myself to go back to it. I might just have to get that book from the library.
Yeah. Sometimes you just got to read it.
Yeah, it's like rolling the dice.
So, Michael, you want to go next?
Yeah, I had a bad week for fiction. I didn't read any fiction this week. I'd started Leviathan Wakes by James S. A. Corey. And, had the audiobook. I've got the ebook. Just I can't get excited about it. So I'm going to try to tackle it this week. Nothing against the book. I'm just some things going on and new writing projects and so on and so forth. So, but I did read a couple of books this week.
Sorry to while you're on Leviathan Wakes.
Yeah.
I have to say, like, I love that series, and I'm on the 5th book now.
Okay.
But I'll be honest, I must have picked up that book up probably 3 or 4 times before I finally read it. The intro was a little confusing, and honestly, it just didn't kind of grab me. But once you get through that first little section, it gets really good.
Yeah, I like the intro. It was what came after it where I was kind of confused. So I'm gonna stick with it definitely. But I did pick up something from the library that I'm excited about. Haven't got a chance to get to it yet, but this is, if you can see, Fahrenheit 451, the authorized graphic novel adaptation. One of my favorite novels of all time. Did not know it got graphic novel treatment, so I'm gonna read the hell out of this book. So I'll be able to report about that next week. And I read Dictate Your Book by Monica Leonel. That's one of her new books, just out today. It's basically a manifesto on why and how authors can use dictation programs like Dragon, naturally speaking, to dictate their books. And I've tried dictation off and on throughout the years, and I just could never get behind it because it was either clunky, it was awkward. I felt like I was handicapped every time I tried to speak, and it would say something totally different. But I got Dragon, and I'm really impressed how far the technology's come. It's surprisingly accurate. I probably would say it's probably 95% accurate out of all the things I say. So
how do you get past the idea that only stupid things come out of my mouth, but when I type, it's all smart and awesome? I don't. That's where I disconnect it.
Yeah, it's just practice. Like yeah, it's interesting. Like she talks about some of the ways that you can get set up and like training your Dragon. That's the thing people talk about. And that leads me to another book that I read that goes kind of hand in hand with this, which is The Productive Author's Guide to Dictation by Cindy Grigg. And that book is helpful because it has dictation exercises. So basically, okay, so she says, here is the section from the Jungle Book, right? And here are the commands that you need to know. Dictate this section from the book until you can get it perfectly. Right? So basically you spend 30, 40 minutes doing that until you're comfortable, and then you can get more comfortable in dictating your own work.
Now, did she pick that partly because of the names? Like, so you have to train Dragon to know, like, Mowgli and Shere Khan
Exactly.
and weird stuff like that?
Exactly, the proper pronouns. And she just excerpts from, like, I think there's one from Alice in Wonderland, like public domain stuff. But it's interesting because she picks some really challenging ones and some really easy ones, so you're getting a good feel for how to dictate and how to actually speak so that it renders it on the page exactly as it's intended.
I've never tried dictation, but I'd be worried that, John walked down the street, pick up eggs and milk. And, it'd start like rambling off all like a to-do list or something. And,
Yeah, well, it's interesting. There's different commands and stuff where you can make it go to sleep. Like I've got my Dragon on right now, but I've turned off the microphone so it's not picking up anything that I'm saying. So I think if you've tried it in the past, it's worth giving another shot, just because the technology has come so far, and my word counts have skyrocketed since I started it and gotten comfortable with it. So it took 3 days though, and those first 3 days were brutal. Like I mean, I literally felt like I had my hands tied behind my back and my eyes were gouged out. You know, like it was painful. But like learning to type, right? I mean, it's difficult to learn how to type, but eventually you get over that initial learning curve and it becomes easier. So dictation is exactly like that. If you go into the mindset that you're going to be successful, then better things will start to happen as you practice the software. So, but that was my week in reading.
Okay. How about you, Jamie?
Well, I finished that with my son. The graphic novel side, we finished the Adventure Time Seeing Red. So that one's done. That was good. That was the black and white one. We started on because we happened across it at the library, the Quest for the Spark. So that's like the Bone novels, I guess episode 1 or book 1. So we're, I think maybe 3-4 chapters into that. And that's so the occasional illustrations, like 1 a chapter, 2 a chapter illustrations, are Jeff Smith, but the story is Tom Snagowski or whatever I guess the name is. I think he collaborated on some of the other Bone stuff a little bit somewhere along the line, right? So yeah, no, and that's been kind of neat. Like we're just sort of setting up the characters. I'm excited. I think tonight we're reading the rat creature chapters, so I get back to my old quiche loving friends. So assuming it's the same rat creatures, I looks like it is, but I'm not 100% sure yet. But those guys are great.
I miss those guys.
So then, so that's that's underway. And I did finish at a very late hour this morning, Storm of Swords, or A Storm of Swords. So book 3 of Game of Thrones. I haven't watched the series at all, so I've been just to let you know, Justin, 'cause I know you mentioned beforehand that you are a fan. So it's amazing. I did a really good job of avoiding spoilers for this book because there were a lot of major, seminal moments in the TV series in this, in this book, right? So, and it was great. Like this start to finish was the best book of the series so far, in my opinion. I really liked the first one too, and I got into it pretty well. The second one, I don't know whether it was just where I was at, but it lulled a bit for the first third, but then had a great final third. This one,
you could watch the show because you just won't know what's actually in the book or what's not. It's just like a mix. It's 50-50, so you can watch the show. You're safe. Yeah. You'll be fun guessing.
But it's like I'd heard of the Red Wedding. I did not know any details whatsoever. So none. Nice. I didn't know who was going to be involved. I didn't know where this would be. I didn't know anything, and I was trying to guess sort of what might be. And so I was always waiting for it whenever anything sort of wedding related might come up for anybody.
A red dress, and you're like, no, not the red dress.
Yeah, but and the last third of this book has been really awesome. Like there are just so many twists and so many different directions that he takes it with pretty much every character. It was fantastically done. So I was gonna wait, but I guess I'll just have to pull that down now. So I think that's what I'm gonna be reading next. So. Finally getting to it. So Feast for Crows will start you tonight. So that's my week in reading. But no, that one is really good. And I know I'll probably be let down because apparently this one isn't as good as the previous one. But we'll see. I'm into it, so I'll go on.
Book 5 is the best though. So.
Is it? Okay, that's good. That's good.
Debatable. In my opinion, I had the most fun reading Book 5. Maybe it's because I waited so long for it.
Fair enough.
But conversely, the TV show season 5 was my least favorite. So.
Well, the interesting thing is, this one is a tiny 976 pages, so I really got through it fast. Not 1130 something, I think my copy was on the on Storm of Swords.
Still big enough to be a murder weapon, right?
Not in the trade paperback, or not in the mass market paperback.
Yeah.
Although you call that mass market paper, really.
And still, it seems like nothing when compared to Brandon Sanderson's novels.
Yeah, we'll probably get there a little bit later in the show. How about you, Patrick? What have you been up to this week?
I read Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood End, and which I think is another show. I haven't seen anything about it, but I think it's going to be turned into a TV show. Oh, yeah. I've just heard. I haven't seen any trailers or anything. So this is, I think this was written back in the 50s, and I read it. I got it from Kindle Unlimited, and I think the reason I read it was because my wife wanted to read it because she'd heard it's becoming a TV show and she wanted to check it out. She loved it. She enjoyed the book more than I did, and I found so one of the problems I had with it was more with the format of the book than the writing. It seems like they've put a lot of these old sci-fi books sort of in the digital world, and they haven't formatted them very well. So in this book, for example, every time there was a scene shift or a point of view shift, there was nothing to indicate that. So there was no blank space, no hashtag, or nothing. So you'd be reading about one character, and then all of a sudden you'd be in a different location in a different head, and there was nothing to indicate that. With missing that space, so it was kind of jerky that way. Like it would take you a line or two to realize, like, oh, I'm not where I thought I was. The It's also a very I think we've talked about the mice quotient before. Milio, idea, character, and event. This is definitely very much an I book, an idea book. So aliens come, show up on Earth, and they become our overlords, and they fix all of the problems that humanity has. But there's something about them that makes humanity kind of grateful for what they've done for us, but not too sure about really what their sort of end game is. And they hang around for 20, 50, 100 years. And so the book kind of goes through the different stages of them being here, follows a few different characters through their lives, living in this new world that the aliens have created. And so the ideas in the book are very, very cool, but it is a lot of I almost feel like you're reading a history. A lot of exposition, with some bits of character and dialogue and action thrown in. So I enjoyed it, but I'm more of a sort of character and event guy. So I enjoyed it for an idea book. It's a classic, so I don't regret reading it. But it's certainly worth checking out. The one of the reviews on Goodreads I really liked because it included a quote from Kurt Vonnegut that I wish I could find right now, but I don't want to test my internet, which basically said something along the line that Vonnegut said that childhood's end is one of only a very few truly classic science fiction novels, and all of the others were written by Vonnegut himself. So I thought that was cute. And that's my reading for the week. So we can move on to our topic, which is Best Fantasy Series. So I think we have a list that we're going to kind of go through, but I'm sure that you guys will have other books to talk about that aren't, we're not limited to that list, obviously. So who wants to go first? Jamie and Justin, I think, are bigger into the fantasy than
Justin's
Michael or
our
I.
guest. We'll let Justin hit
Yes.
us up with some of his favorites first.
Do you have a favorite? You'd have like one that stands out above all the rest, like an ultimate favorite fantasy book or series?
Yeah, so obviously Game of Thrones for me. It's kind of the reason I started writing. It was back in the day. I'd read the books and I was waiting for the fourth one, I think, to come out, and I was just like, why are there not better books like this? Why am I having to wait? And so I said, well, screw it. I'm going to write, and see if I can write something that is as awesome as that. And then I totally evolved into a different person based on that, different author and style and everything. But the fact that was my big motivation makes me have to put that at the top of the list, probably.
I'm just out of curiosity. I always like to ask people like what drew them to Game of Thrones. What was it about Martin that captivated you?
Yeah, so I did a master's in creative writing at Johns Hopkins, and it's a very literary program. So they're like anti all this fantasy stuff. But we had a class once where you take in whatever book that you're reading at the time and try to convince the rest of the class why they need to read it. And so I took in Game of Thrones, and there's early on in the first or second page is a section where Bran, the little boy, comes out and he's witnessing his dad, getting ready to chop off a guy's head. And the way that he witnesses him in that one paragraph says everything about the two sides of his dad, like who he is as a ruler, who he is as a father, and it's written in just such condensed, amazing prose. I was blown away by that, and so that's the paragraph I brought in and highlighted and showed the class, and I think I convinced a few of them. They're all nodding their heads by the end of it. It's better if I have the book with me to underline and show you guys, but but that's the part. And of course, the reason that I got to it in the first place was word of mouth. Just a friend had said, "Hey, if you want to read good fantasy, this is the one to read." And it's funny that you guys were talking about books that you pick up and put down a few times, because I think that was one. Although I loved the prose at first, just you switching all these character chapter names, and I was just getting overwhelmed. And I think I had to reread the first 100 pages a couple times to figure out what's going on and who's who. So people who haven't read it, be warned. There is a little bit of confusion possible in those early pages.
Is there like a faction of Game of Thrones fans out there who feel better than everybody else because they've been reading it since 1970 when you started writing it? I've been a fan since day one. You only started reading it because you only heard about it in 2010.
The funny thing with that,
yeah, I was
like, this one, like, this is the fourth book, right? This is 2005, so it's still 10 years old, right? Like, but people have been reading it for a decade before that. So it's because it's not a complete series. I think there's a little bit less of that than you'd get with a lot of other properties. So
yeah, I think it's more about the TV show versus the non-TV show. Like, are you a TV watcher or a book reader? And if you're only one or the other, then there's the faction there. And it's just such different stories because so many different things happen in the TV show than in the books. It's almost like a different book, Just the same characters, just a different story.
Have you read the graphic novel adaptations?
Yeah, so as you mentioned in the intro, I work on Game of Thrones at Telltale, and so I tried to absorb every single thing I could, like the graphic novels, and there was another video game made about it a few years back. I played that through, and reading all the wikis and everything, and I love the graphic novel adaptations. They did a pretty good job with that, and the old game gets a lot of flack, but I enjoyed it. I think it had a great storyline. The game, what it was, is the gameplay was kind of weird. The people who had designed it had too much detail for you guys, but the main point is it was older than when it came out. So it had been designed a few years back, and then it took a while for it to come out, and so it looked clunky by the time it did.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, I've been wanting to get into the Game of Thrones series, and I'm like, well, I don't know if I can commit to a 1,000-page novel, but I'm like, oh, maybe the library would have the graphic novel versions. The library would be a good introduction into the series, but I mean, they're never in stock.
It'll absorb your life, but like I said, it's all about the prose, though. So you're going to lose out a lot because I think, I mean, at least in the beginning, I think at other times too, he just does such a great job at the prose. That's why I read it. And of course Tyrion is amazing, the little dwarf character. Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I'm not a massive fantasy guy, but I see sort of the first one on this list that we were looking at is that stands out for me was Philip Pullman's his Dark Materials trilogy.
Yeah.
Which is one that I haven't read. So.
Me either.
Oh, you haven't?
No.
Have you read that one, Justin?
Of course.
Yeah.
So I read the first one. I'm actually a big fan of YA and middle grade, and when I write, I read a lot of that stuff too. And so this one drew me in because of that. And they had done the movie, but I'd heard that everybody was saying the book was so much better than the movie and pretty different. I don't remember if it was different because I just don't remember the movie that well. But the book I thought was pretty amazing. That said, it's one of those books that I tried to read the sequel and I just couldn't get into it for some reason.
Yeah.
There's those books that they do a great job on book one, and then after that you kind of just have no real reason to keep going. I'm sure a lot of people out there did. I just, for some reason, it couldn't pull me in.
The first book was amazing. I would agree with you. Like the second one, it really does kind of suffer from second book in a trilogy syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's mostly set up for the third book, which is a lot longer and a lot more involved. But it's in the long run. So book one on its own is a fantastic read. The series, I think, is overall isn't as good, but I think still worth checking out.
So book three you've read and you recommend?
Yeah, it's it gets pretty wonky. Like he goes off in some pretty, the book already, for people who don't know, sort of takes place in a world where people have I can't think of the right word now, but basically familiars. Although they're just called demons.
Yeah.
So every person sort of has a demon familiar, which is sort of a piece of their soul in the form of an animal that follows them around, and it causes people great pain to be separated from their animals. It's actually taboo to even touch another person's demon. And the book does get, I think that's a series that's been banned in a lot of schools because it does get extremely overtly religious towards the end of book 1, and then that follows through the next 2 books. But yeah, it's a good series.
Yeah, I always like books that don't get in your face. Like Maze Runner. I don't know if that's on that list, if that's considered fantasy or what it is. The movie didn't really feel fantasy, but the book did. Book 1. And then until at the end you find out, I'm not going to give it away, but you find out what it's all about, and you're kind of like, okay, I don't really need to read the rest of them.
So you haven't read that, the series?
I read book 1.
Okay.
I did not read the rest. Yeah.
The reason I'm asking is because I read the first chapter of book 1 and promptly took it back to the library. But anyway, I saw the trailer yesterday for the second movie.
Oh, they're doing a second movie. Okay.
Watched the trailer, and I was like, you know what? That actually looks really cool. I wonder if I should give this series another try. But I was like, well, no. Actually, what I did was I went to Wikipedia and read the plot synopsis for all 3 books. It is the most confusing mess of twists and turns, and
Like
I just couldn't follow the plot twists.
Like a maze.
Well, yeah, not in a good way. A labyrinth that you can't find your way out of.
But if you do, maybe there's a big reward, like $1 million check or something. Have you ever finished it?
YA, the kids love it. I don't think it's a series for me. It seemed a little too sort of convoluted.
Yeah, but you've read it, Jamie. Is that right?
No,
Okay.
But seeing the movie, I've had the exact same reaction as the book. It's like, oh, okay, that was kind of neat, and then it's like, open something up, and then I don't know where they're going to go now at all. Like, but it's completed that unit, and it's something completely different at this point, right?
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like from the plot synopsis, it's like, okay, well, this character that was on his side betrays him, except she didn't really betray him. She was told that she was supposed to tell him that she was betraying him, so that it just
that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember any of that, but what I loved about it was in the book, you feel like maybe this is the afterlife and you don't know. And the movie didn't really capture that. I don't think at any point watching the movie I was like, is this the afterlife? You just felt like it was some weird thing going on. And so that they lost that whole. When you adapt a book into a movie, a lot of times the main thing you should focus on is what's behind the story, like what's your feeling and your sense, and it just seems like they ignored that and just tried to copy what you would see.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. I had a book on my list too, and that is The Amulet of Samarkand.
Yeah.
Which have you guys read that? Sounds like you have, Justin. Okay.
Yeah, loved it.
Yeah, it's the Bartimaeus sequence by Jonathan Stroud.
Oh, I've heard of that one. Okay.
Yeah, this is interesting because I actually read the graphic novel. I didn't actually read the book, but and the graphic novel was okay. But from what I read of the book sounded a lot more interesting. Like it's kind of like what you talked about, Justin. Like when you're adapting a film, like you want to capture what's behind the story. I felt like the graphic novel didn't do as good a job of that because the book, the graphic novel, basically it's about this kid who I guess is like he can cast spells and he captures this amulet, and there's this demon in the amulet named Bartimaeus, and Bartimaeus is this really cool, interesting character that's got these great personality quirks, right? And so this kid is trying to use magic for I won't spoil the story, but it's cool. But I feel like the books are narrated by Bartimaeus, right? Whereas
so it's interesting because it switches back and forth between first and third person, and when it's in first person it's Bartimaeus, when it's in third person it's him kind of more talking about the boy, like showing what the boy's story is, but it's still I think him narrating it. And he even uses footnotes in the story, which is kind of fun in a fun way.
And I thought Bartimaeus was the best part of that series. Like he made that first book, I thought, and I thought the graphic novel just didn't capture that. It was all very sterile third person.
Did you go on? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just saying, did you read the next ones after that?
No, I didn't. They haven't come into the library yet. So
I was gonna say maybe this podcast, this one should be renamed like series that you can't get past the first book. that was another one. I loved the first book, and then for some reason I just couldn't get into the next. I tried like a chapter or two, and I was like, fizzled out. You know.
That story idea, though, reminds me of, and I'm trying to remember, was it Robert Asprin, I think, his Myth Inc. Series? It was the same sort of idea. None of you guys have read that one?
No.
It's very Terry Pratchett, humor. I mean, Robert Asprin, I think most of his stuff was sort of comedic like that.
Yeah, it's comedic and it's dark at the same time, but I guess I would consider The Amulet of Samarkand kind of YA. So
yeah,
it's another good book for the YA crowd, so it's not too out there. But
yeah.
Well, you mentioned Terry Pratchett there. So does he win the award for the biggest series? Because I think he probably does in fantasy, right?
It's like what, 45 books or something like that.
Something like that, in various different cycles and various different, sort of pieces of that world. But it is all Discworld, right? Which is pretty amazing. And from what I've heard, there's a lot, because I've only read one. I've got to get to more. It's on my list somewhere. Pretty much there's stuff to like and stuff to enjoy everywhere through that series. Now I've heard if you go back and try and read it sequentially in the order that he wrote them, some of the early ones aren't as are definitely not as good as what would come later. But when you've written that many in that world, wow,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Are you guys fans of Terry Pratchett? I know a lot of people love him.
Well,
I liked what I read, so
I constantly bring up Good Omens. That's, and of course that's with Neil Gaiman, but and I've read a few of the Discworld books, and the one actually that I remember the most must be in one of those, I can't remember what you called it, Jay, like a sideline kind of thing, was that The Amazing Maurice and his Fantastic Rodents or something like that.
Yeah.
It was a very strange kind of
rodents, I think.
Yeah, it had a strange title, but yeah, I like Terry Pratchett.
Yeah, and I read Guards, which is part of the whole Night Watch Regiment, whatever stuff section of it, which was pretty funny and has some, I don't know, there's really cool characters. It's something I definitely will explore more of. So
you guys will have to together a list of the best ones, top 3 of his or something. I feel like I've tried to read a couple of his, and I could tell he knows how to write, but it always felt like the style outshone the book to me, and maybe I just didn't read enough to really get invested. Maybe that was the problem.
Try there's Google. We should put it attach it, put a link with from the YouTube. But there's someone did an infographic of all the different cycles and gives you the best entry points to his books. It's so you can start here and read these 6, but then you want to go out to here and maybe read that cycle next, and then
sounds good. Sounds like a lifetime of reading ahead of me.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. But they read quick too, so because they're not they're not Game of Thrones length. So
yeah. Okay. Cool.
Well, I had another one on my list, and that is the Mouse Guard series by David Peterson, and that's a graphic novel series. I mentioned this last year, I think, in the podcast. I guess the best way I would describe it would be Game of Thrones, but with mice.
Wow.
It's pretty awesome. Just the art, and it's basically, it follows these guards. They're like soldiers for the Mouse King.
Michael, can you guys hear Michael?
No, he cut out.
Yeah. Your sound cut out.
You.
The Google gods do not like him talking.
We can see you, but you can't hear you.
Try
talk. Oh. So while Michael tries to fix his sound, I was going to say, if we're talking about mice, and I think it was another series that was on the list that we were kind of flipping through, is the Redwall.
Right.
Yeah, I've heard about that one a lot.
Something I've never read, but I know some people love it. Yeah.
That's a series that I've read. I read the first book years ago. I think I read the first probably 2 or 3. I've got the first one sitting on my Kindle. It's a series that I want to sort of start again and then go through. There's got to be
Redwall.
Gosh, there's got to be 20 books in that series by now.
And is that YA, middle grade, young reader?
I think it's younger. I think it's
I don't know what it's classified as, but yeah, probably middle grade to YA. Yeah. But it's also it's a series too, I think, that adults can enjoy.
Yeah. But it's definitely shelved there in the library.
Yep.
Have you guys read Mistborn?
I haven't. It's funny. I got into Sanderson sort of backwards through I've read some of the one-offs are in different places, like The Rhythmatist, and I read Warbreaker, and I read the one you said in The Emperor's Soul, or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've read one-offs those places. And I wanted to read more of his stuff. I've got to get into Mistborn.
Mistborn is amazing.
And Stormlight Archive, which once
Yeah.
I've read. But I love writing excuses, and I've listened to.
Oh, it's so good. Yeah, I think if there's like a fantasy book that I look back on fondly, like Game of Thrones is like intense craziness, and Mistborn is more like that was fun. I had a great time reading those books. My best buddy always points out that I totally forgot this. Like I read Elantris by Brandon Sanderson.
Yeah,
Elantris,
which was his debut novel, published novel.
I loved that book, but I kept talking about how much I loved it and what a great author is. And my buddy pointed out that I skipped a third of the novel, and I totally forgot this for years. Because he writes in 3 point of views, and I think I loved 2 of them, and the third one I just couldn't get into, so I just kind of skipped every chapter of that one. Anyway, it's just a weird kind of, got to watch out when you're doing your point of views. Make sure that all of them are very interesting. I went back and read it later, and it was interesting. It just, for some reason, it didn't seem to fit for me with the rest of them. Have you guys read Elantris? Anybody?
I haven't read any Sanderson, and I think one of the reasons is because I tried to read The Wheel of Time, and I remember reading the first book and getting 50 or 100 pages in and realizing that nothing had happened.
Yeah,
that's nothing to do with him.
So,
that was written way before.
No. But no. I understand that, but I'm saying, but I know that he then continued that series, and I worry that his style of fantasy may be in that vein, and I think it's one of the reasons that I haven't picked up one of his books. Just a silly.
Funny.
I know it's strange, but.
Well, it's funny because I have a coworker. I know I shouldn't go into too much detail, but the point is, some people they hate Brandon Sanderson because he screwed up the last bits of the Wheel of Time because his style of writing is so like condensed and to the point, according to this guy, a couple of people I know,
exactly.
Versus Robert Jordan was like you said, kind of long-winded, like to be flowery with his prose and get to things in a long period of time, and they felt Brandon Sanderson did the opposite of that and screwed it up. So it's kind of funny that you say that's your reason.
Exactly.
So which of his books should I read first then?
I really loved, like I said, the Mistborn trilogy. I thought those were great. Elantris is also quite fun, but it's his debut novel, so
his magic systems, world building, like intertwined, are just amazing.
I've heard that.
Like he's so good at that, and
yeah.
But his characters are cool. Like it's but like he's saying, like the pacing's good, and it goes. There's don't worry.
And let's go.
I haven't. The Wheel of Time is the one big epic. Like one that as I was going through it, like a few years ago, I went through and I read first books of a whole bunch of series, and that was the one that I put down fairly quickly, and I never picked it back up again.
It's tough. A lot of people love it, but here's the thing: is what I wanted to kind of to see, what you guys talked about, subgenres and all that, and there's definitely like that sword and sorcery fantasy that you pick up and you feel as fantasy. Like I would say the spin-offs from the Lord of the Rings, kind of the Lord of the Rings, but not really, because that still feels so literary and awesome, and the characters. There's all those spin-offs that you pick up and you're like, okay, there's orcs and goblins, I get it. But then there's Brandon Sanderson and George Martin, who are obviously fantasy, but when you're reading those books, you don't really know if they're fantasy. You're like, okay, this is fantasy, but it's more just fantasy stuff happening in an awesome story in a real world that I could belong to, And so that's how I approach like Brandon Sanderson and George Martin, and why I love them so much. Like you don't know that Game of Thrones is fantasy except for because of the prologue until towards the end of the book, the first one.
The first
kind
book
of an amazing thing.
That's the thing, yeah.
Yeah. And I love that they got away with that, and that's what kind of brings me into those authors' books. If you start right away with, I did a magic fireball, I'm going to be like, well, okay, cool for you. Good job. Next book.
On the other hand, a magic-heavy one that I do love, and this is the one that I've almost been stopping myself from continuing to read it yet, because I'm just going to wait so I can do it all together. But The Name of the Wind, so Patrick Rothfuss. I love that first book, and because he hasn't released the third book yet, and a lot of people are just waiting for that, and he takes so much care and crafts so much like that. And he's got the novella that came out last fall, but I've got the second book, and I'm going to wait on it, because I feel like when I read that one, I'm going to want to keep going with the rest of it right then. And he's got just, I don't know, he does a lot of cool stuff. He's got that really deep, rich world, and he's got the magic school stuff going on within The Name of the Wind, and I don't know. I think it's pretty fantastic, and I really enjoy. I have a ton of time for him and what he, when he speaks on the internet and what have you as well. So,
The Name of the Wind. Is that what you said? Okay. And that said, like there are those magic books that are awesome. Like I can't believe I was listening to you guys talk on one of your podcasts, and some of you guys hadn't read all the Harry Potter books. I was like, what? Or
I'm
all of you
working
guys,
my
maybe. Is it
I'm
all of
working
you?
my way. All right, I'll be starting. What am I on book 4? Goblet of Fire,
Okay.
which I think is
I
book
haven't
4.
started yet.
Ah,
Yeah, but again,
ah, it
like
hurts.
again, I've been reading fantasy all my life, so that was like
Yeah,
this little upstart that came along, when I read so much stuff already, and it was
yeah.
because it was directed more towards kids. I wasn't in a place where I was reading
Here's the
YA
key:
type stuff.
pick up book 6 or 7 first. Read that.
Yeah, no,
That's what I
I will
did.
do it. The reason I haven't read it so far is because I'm waiting until I can read it to my kids or read it with my
Okay,
kids when they're
that's
at that
fun.
stretch. That's what I'm waiting for at
Yeah.
this point. So
What if the
I
books
have
all
so many other
grow
things
for
I can
you?
read between now and then. So.
What if they all disappear and then you're lost? You never know. Yeah, no, but when I actually did pick up book 6, I think it was, and because I didn't think I was going to read it, I was like, I'm an adult. Why am I going to read this kid's book? And somebody had book 6, and I started reading it just to like on their desk or something, like what's this about? And then I just boom, 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 boom. It's just so like it's just clear. It gets to the point. It goes through. Apparently her editors just did an amazing job on it.
I found like book 1 was fantastic. YA, I mean, it was a good, clear little story. I mean, it's interesting that every book got progressively longer than the one before it.
Mhm.
Book 2 was nice and clean. The end of book 3 kind of drove me a little crazy. The whole scene in the cabin with his uncle and or Godfather.
Oh,
The story kind of dragged for me there.
Prisoner of Azkaban, that one,
Yeah,
the time
and
travel stuff.
so so
Hmm.
I'm going to continue with the series, but it's one of those like I think reading a 7-book series when you know that the last book in the series is significantly longer. Is kind of that's the idea too of committing to 1,000 pages, right? I don't want to commit to that one series right now. I want to read a bunch of different things by different authors. So, but I've
Yeah.
got the entire series is available through Kindle Unlimited. So really,
Hmm.
nobody has any reason not to read it. Um, but
So is
so
The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, by the way.
read
Or
The
that.
Hobbit, loved The Hobbit, grew up on The Hobbit, and the original like the animated weird movies that they did.
Yes.
But I've never been able to
Premium
make it
Bus.
all the
Yeah.
way through Lord of the Rings. I've tried to read Lord of the Rings several times through my life, and I just can't do it.
I was with you. I did it when I was younger and kept trying, and it was kind of like, eh. And then I did it last year, I think, on my Kindle, and for some reason it all of a sudden clicked and it all worked for me.
Hmm.
Maybe it's because I was at a more of a fantasy point in my life or something, as far as books are concerned, or I'm not sure. But yeah, they're all on Kindle Unlimited along with the audiobooks, I believe, at least for The Hobbit for sure. So if you have a Kindle Unlimited subscription, you get the audiobooks for free. It's pretty amazing.
I've seen the movies. I
Yeah.
went to see the movies because I wanted to see how the whole thing ended after all those years of.
Well,
Um, but man, those movies are long.
and they are weird. Oh, the Lord of the Rings movies, they're really good. Yeah.
Yeah,
The Hobbit one was kind of the new one. It's
I haven't
different.
I like
seen.
them too.
I haven't seen
They're
any of
different.
those.
But I like them.
I can't. We're talking about committing to a long book. I can't commit to a 3-hour movie. I just can't do it. Whether it's in the theater or even at home, I just if it's longer than 2 hours, I won't watch it.
Hey,
I almost grabbed Interstellar from the library the other day, and then I looked at how long it is on the back of the box. Nope, that thing's like 3 hours long or something ridiculous like that.
yeah.
I just don't have time
Yeah.
for it.
Okay. But
What about one of the other ones that was on the list that I remember reading when I was a kid and absolutely loved and would like to read again as an adult is Mary Stewart's The Crystal Cave,
mhm.
The Hollow Hill, sort of her Arthurian legend.
Yeah. No, I
Oh
love
yeah.
it. That was the third one I remember reading as a child. Maybe fourth, because depending on where you fit stuff. But after I read C.S. Lewis, so the Chronicles of Narnia, when I
Hmm.
was 3 or 4 or whatever, and then Tolkien when I was like 5. Then I think Wizard of Oz was somewhere in there too, and then after that was Mary Stewart. So yeah, no, I've got fond
I
memories. It
know.
was so long ago because it was 30
Yeah.
years ago, whatever now. But I really loved that at the time, and my mom introduced me to it, and I just saw it on. We were just in a bookstore, like a used bookstore the other day, and I pulled out one of the books and showed it to my wife, and I'm like, oh, you should check these out sometimes.
I
They're
know
really
I've
good.
read The Crystal Cave a bunch of times when I was a kid, and then I know I read The Hollow Hills and The Last Enchantment.
Mm.
And I think I probably didn't complete the series because based on what I'm seeing, there was 2 more books after that.
Yeah, I
The
think
Wicked Day and The Prince and the Pilgrim. I
I
don't think
don't remember those either. So
Are those ones high fantasy? I mean, do they have magic or whatnot?
Yes.
Yes.
Strange magic, I would say.
Okay.
Without
Luminous magic.
I'd like to read those. I love Arthurian legend. Once a Future King when I was a kid, that was amazing. It was up there in the charts for sure.
Yeah, and it was a different one from the. Well, I don't know if you've heard us talk about Jack White on the show other times too. He tries to do the historical version of explaining the Arthurian legends, which is really cool. Whyte.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's a fantasy.
Too, yeah.
So that's a bit of a more long drawn out sort of the historical fantasy, which I just adored. And he goes into quite a bit of detail about the way the Roman armies.
Well, he tries to do it as straight up historical fiction.
It was so interesting.
He tries to explain everything with historical accuracy. So that was it's a cool thing.
That's one of my
this list, but it is a cool thing.
I'm glad I got a couple from this list I need to work through. It's exciting.
Yeah, Jack White's he's a fantastic author.
The other place I have to go and talk about for a minute is, in the classic ones of, I guess, sort of my teen years, the Dragonlance, the Chronicles, and the Legends. Those two. Wait, Legends? Chronicles? Anyway, the Twins ones, the Time of the Twins, War of the Twins, Test of the Twins. Those first 6 books that went together were some of the best ones ever done in the sort of the Dungeons and Dragons world. So that was Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. And then the other one that was good was R.A. Salvatore's first Drow cycle. The Drizzt Do'Urden ones were a little later, I guess, high school, but quite good too. Those are like my favorites within all that. There's a lot of crap in the Dungeons and Dragons world, like novelization stuff, but those ones are really cool stories.
I think I'm going to have to, since we were talking about Arthurian legend, and one of the ones on the list is T.H. White's The Once and Future King, which
that was on my bookshelf growing up there in my bedroom. I remember where it was.
I got it right now.
What's that?
It's the dirtiest book on my bookshelf for some reason. I think I just had it for so long.
Didn't age well, didn't it?
What's that?
No, I was saying that one just didn't age well. Like I remember the book looked old and crappy when I had it as a kid.
Yeah,
so.
Maybe it's made to look that way. Gives it character.
There you go. The other ones I remember back then were those Belgariad and Malorian ones, which I think were really fun at the time, but I think are more meant to be read by a teenage boy because they don't stand up as well.
I recognize
cool worlds. But
I recognize those titles. Who's
David Eddings? David Eddings.
Oh, okay. I think the only thing I've read of theirs, so David and Lee Eddings, was The Redemption of Alphalus.
Yeah, it was all David Eddings. It wasn't David and Lee Eddings for the Belgariad.
That's the one I've read. And that was a book that, you were saying, Justin, that Lord of the Rings didn't click until later in life. Well, this Redemption of Alphalus was one that I just absolutely loved when I first read it, probably in my 20s. Tried reading it again in my late 30s. Hated it. Couldn't. It just, but your tastes grow, because of course I probably read, 100 or 200 books in between, and I just could not get into it at that point. But loved it the first time I read it.
Oh, I just saw another one that I have fond memories from when I was a kid too, and that probably would have been like later junior school. But that was the Darkest Rising sequence by Susan Cooper. So the Darkest Rising, they did a very poor movie version of that second book. But like there's Oversea Under Stone, The Darkest Rising. There's Greenwich, The Grey King, The Silver on the Tree, I think was the series. It was just really cool YA one that's like younger, not even YA, it was like middle grade sort of one. But it introduced, like it had some Arthurian legend stuff, some Norse mythology, some sort of ancient like British folklore stuff. There's a lot of neat stuff in that. And I remember loving that as a kid.
What'd be cool is if you guys could get a reader to make a list that's similar to this one, but for all self-published. Like, what are the best self-published fantasy books out there? So one of your listeners should do that and let us know.
Sure,
let us
know in the comments. There you go. And we're coming up on an hour, so we should probably wrap this up in a few minutes. And for those of you who are wondering, the reason Michael has been so quiet is his audio kind of crapped out on him about 10 minutes ago, and it doesn't look like it's going to come back. So, Michael, if you have any... if you have any last-minute books you want to sort of shout out, maybe just drop them in the comments, and I'll mention them for you.
I was going to say the one that I probably have read the most books in And this is partially because my wife enjoyed it too, and it's a funny one. But Terry Goodkind's Sort of Truth series, where the first book is fantastic, and then a lot of people don't like basically that he said, he made his hero too overpowered by the end of that first book, that he had to do a lot of contrived stuff to play with it to make anything else make sense as a next sort of growth and stuff. But he's got 13 books or whatever in the series, and I've by and large enjoyed it, even though some people hate some of his libertarian stuff that comes in through some books in the series, and then he's got other things where, books where there's different lead characters and stuff. But I don't know, for whatever reason, it was a neat series because it's got this male and female protagonists that are both powerful in their own right and love each other. So it's this couple that are trying to live their life, trying to make a life while having to deal with the end of the world coming up every 5 minutes and all this stuff. And I don't know, just that dynamic was a really interesting one that I haven't really seen explored like that, where it's co-equal and very different, and both very important in so much stuff, and having very different, both having magic, very different magic stuff too. So I don't know, that's one that I've quite liked. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on it.
Well, Michael wanted to mention American Gods and Anansi Boys. Obviously, that's Neil Gaiman. And again, if I'm not mistaken, I think American Gods is coming down the pike as a TV show as well.
Great books, but I don't know if I'd call that a series, because those are kind of two loosely related great individual books.
Yeah, what's a good one for the self-published one is, and I talk about it a lot, Will White, the Traveler's Gate series. So I heard about those through word of mouth when I was asking my buddy what's good on Kindle Unlimited, because I was thinking about checking it out, and he said that for a minute and thought, and he's like, definitely the best one I could recommend is Traveler's Gate, and the first book of that is called The House of Blades. I think just House of Blades, no the on it. But anyway, you guys check that one out for sure. It's really well written, and it's fun because it's self-published, and so he kind of just has fun with it at places, which some people might find annoying, but I found kind of exhilarating because it didn't just stick to the common what do you call it, the model or whatever,
And you said that's Will White?
Yeah, Will White.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And the Swords and Sorcery one that I haven't gotten to yet, but I've heard so many good things about, and it did well enough to cross over, was Michael Sullivan's Ryria Revelations. Yeah, that was a good one to do for audiobook, right? So that's I've read some shorts in that world, and looked at it a bit, but he did so well with that he did get a traditional publishing contract for it. So that's starts with Theft of Swords, I think was the first book there. That's on my list somewhere that I want to get to.
Okay, so Justin, thanks for coming tonight.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
It's been a lot of fun, yeah. And do you want to tell our listeners and viewers sort of where's the best place they can get a hold of you online and check out your books?
Sure. Yeah, so the easiest spot is, of course, my website, which is just justinmsloan.com. So M as in Michael, which is annoying because I published all my books under Justin Sloan, because when I was doing it, I didn't know how to put the M in there. So just ignore that, justinmsloan.com, and then at Twitter at justinmsloan. Okay.
Thanks for coming, and we'll wrap it up this week. I don't think we have a topic for next week, but thanks for coming, thanks for watching, and if you have a moment out there, if you could take a minute and rate and review on iTunes, that would be greatly appreciated, and we will see you in a week. Take care, everybody.
Cool. Thank you.